Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss what you would add to games to make them better. And these are like specific games, so it's not just in general what would you for no microtransactions type of thing. I mean, if you want to do that, sure. But I want you to pick like some of your favorite games. Even games where you're like, if this was in it, I'd like it more. Like we're doing the whole gambit, not just games you already like, not games that could have been better, just all around what comes to mind. Because of course, I got ideas for both. But I wanted to do that because it's a fun topic. This is definitely one of those off the cuff ones. Like I just thought of this one. Normally I think like throughout the day, like what can I come up with and this, that, and the other. And this one was like, I was just leaving work and I was like, oh, that's actually interesting. And just to let you guys know, there might be another video because it kind of spawned from the topic of what would actually make for a really great free-to-play game with, that being kind of all the rage for PlayStation, even though it's constantly failing. So that might, that'll probably be a different video. But this, I actually had stuff to talk about because I have no idea what would make for a good free-to-play game. Like there's so many random ideas or just like this type of game, but I have no idea how that would work at all when it comes to free-to-play. But I have tons of games where I'm like, I already like this game, this would make it better, or I don't like this game too much, and this would have made it better for me. So I'm gonna start with where I think a lot of us are probably gonna end up starting, where it's like, well, here's the games that I would have appreciated a whole lot more if this thing was done. And it doesn't have to just be like an element, it can literally be anything. Because the first game I'm kicking things off with is Mirror's Edge Catalyst. And what could have made that game better is if it was just an actual sequel to Mirror's Edge. I think I mentioned it, I'm sure a long time ago. Who knows if that video's even been uploaded yet. I upload these things like way out of order. So if you ever hear a video where it's like I reference something and it seems like it didn't come out, that's because it wasn't out by the time I talked about it. I just put things up when I feel like, that's the one I want to put up today. So it's never in order. It is very rarely in order. Like I'm gonna just date this one. It is May 29th, 2025. Who knows when you'll actually hear this video, but that's the date. So going with Mirror's Edge Catalyst right off the top, I enjoyed the fact that it was open world. I thought it was cool. It definitely needed something else within that open world as well. Like it got boring after a while, but the first Mirror's Edge game, I loved the story element of it because it was like, oh, you have these two characters and I'm gonna spoil it. Let's be honest. Like the game's so old and they killed it by making a crap. It's not a sequel. It's a straight up reboot, which they totally lied about because they said it was like, oh, it's kind of a reboot, kind of a sequel. And in my head, I'm like, okay, you can do that. And in my head, I was thinking maybe they'll recap like parts of the first game and you actually get to play through them. Like maybe you do like the first hour and they shrink down maybe like the last hour or so of the game, or like they switch stuff up just to be like, oh, this happened or that happened. And then you play a little bit and then it continues. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that could work. And then it was just a straight up reboot. Like they just changed the story, which I actually like the story way more in the original game, and it's probably made worse by the fact that I was such a huge fan of the first Mirror's Edge, and then the sequel comes on, it's like, well, you didn't do anything that was shocking or really that great. I would love, if anyone played Catalyst and they never played the original Mirror's Edge, please tell me your experience with that game, specifically the story, because for me, the story in the original Mirror's Edge involves Faith as the main character, and then her sister is a cop. So that's how they did that, and they're on opposite sides of the law, and her sister was actually framed for a murder. And so the whole thing is like Faith is already on the outside of the law, but she has to find a way to prove her sister's innocence. And then there's like this whole conspiracy and like this new section of security pops up where, they don't like runners is what they call them, the people that go across the rooftops. And it's like, oh, they're like training people basically to do parkour. Like it was like a whole thing in the game, but realistically it was like, well, we just train people to do parkour. Like when you boil it down, that's all they did. And they put armor on them and that was about it. But it was a big deal. It was like, hey, this is our thing. And then, they're like finding out where these secret locations are that the runners hide at, like their hiding spots. And it was like a big deal with, trying to figure out like, how is all this stuff blowing up right now? Why was her sister framed for murder? All of these things. And they, of course, because it's all, high level government stuff, of course it all ends up being tied together somehow. And I was like, oh, that's super cool. And the game ends on a cliffhanger. So they finally announced this game, and I swear it had to have been a decade later when the announcement was made for Catalyst. And then, it's a kind of reboot, kind of sequel. BS, it was just a straight up reboot. And then in the game, I'm playing through it and stuff. Then you have this flashback where it's like, oh yeah, these riots or whatever happen. and like my sister died, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's how they're doing it. So it was like this one. As soon as I saw her, I think they do it before they show the flashbacks, but I'm like, okay, so like the other only Asian woman in the whole game, I'm pretty sure, is gonna end up being her sister. What a shock. They do the flashbacks and it's like, yeah, and I lost my sister, I never saw her, and she died that day. And I'm like, okay, so her sister is obviously like the evil only other Asian woman in the game who kind of looks like her. What a shock. And they kept the sister dynamic and then made this horrible, which admittedly it's kind of a big trope anyway, where it's like, yeah, you show a character and then you show a flashback and it's like, well, obviously that character is that character. So there was like no mystery behind it when it's revealed, if you want to even call it that. Like, holy crap, you're my sister. And it's like, we knew that from the beginning, and I almost feel extra offended being someone who was a fan of the first game, where I knew that was the point, is that she had a sister, and they just changed her sister's storyline to be like she was basically adopted by the villain of the game. And it was like, this sucks. This is like nowhere near as compelling, where I'm trying to like solve this mystery of like, why did they frame her sister for murder, and how was all this stuff tied together, where this person gets killed, but her sister's framed for it, and at the exact same time, all of a sudden, runners are getting taken out and they're fighting like hiding spots. Like, there's an actual mystery and story throughout the game. And then in the sequel, it was just like, well, this kind of blows. It seemed like very upfront, like they were just fighting them, and that was it. It wasn't even like a mystery or a twist. It was just like, yeah, they're just fighting them, and that's it. And then of course it gets to the end and it ends on another cliffhanger where it's like, oh, maybe her sister can turn good now that she kind of knows the truth. I was like, what in the world was it? Like, I don't know why they thought doing a reboot was the best idea. And I don't know what the deal is with companies where they'll make a sequel to a game like a decade later. And it's like, hey, you know what you could do? It's like, a lot of people didn't play the first game. Hey, here's something. I know it's crazy. Just give them the first game for free. It's 10 years old. It cost you $10. Like, if you bought the game brand new, the first Mirror's Edge game, by the time the sequel came out, they probably discounted it to like $5 anyway. It's like, just make the first game free if you're doing the sequel a decade later. You honestly should. Every game company should do that. No, like, hands down, everyone should do that. It's like, if people didn't play the first game and it's a decade old, just include it with the sequel. I know that that's, somehow a crazy concept, but the only time I can ever really remember that happening is like Bayonetta 2 did it, and that was because it was like, well, you literally couldn't get the first game on a Nintendo console, and then it became, Switch, or well, at the time it was Wii U, but it became a Nintendo exclusive game because they're the only reasons Bayonetta 2 even came out. And they were like, all right, well, we kind of have to let you play the first game. But even then, they didn't really have to do that. They could have easily been like, yeah, buy the first game and then just, get the second game. But they're like, no, we'll put the first game on here because it literally wasn't even on our last generation console. None of our, direct people could have played it. So here you go. Here's the first game since you bought the second game. You do a sequel 10 years later, and that wasn't even 10 years, but you do a sequel 10 years later, like Mirror's Edge, just do that. Just give the game away for free, the first one. Like, it's already $10 on sale, let's be honest. You just throw it in there so people can just get the first game with whatever the last game was. Even if it was the second game and it took you 10 years to make 3, number 2 is free. At the very least, the last one. It doesn't have to be all of them, at least the last one. But that's a huge change to that game that could have made it better. So that's like a totally different game, of course. But had that just been a genuine sequel to the first Mirror's Edge, which is still an amazing game, I would have been super happy with Mirror's Edge Catalyst. But instead, it's one of my great disappointments in gaming, which is very, very, very sad. But to move on to another one, I'm gonna just hit Resident Evil 3. There's a million things that could have been added to that. It could have just been an actual recreation of the original game and it would have been solid. They also could have at least included like more unlockables. I'm still like blown away by the fact that they made a game and they had 2 alternate costumes. Like, this is Resident Evil. They're like, that's almost like their thing, is that they make alternate costumes at this point. And it was like 2 costumes, that's it? That's insane. Granted, Resident Evil 4 doesn't have a lot of alternate costumes either. Although I guess that's not true. It's the DLC stuff. Technically, you have to kind of pay for it or get like the deluxe edition or whatever. So they weren't necessarily unlockable in every case, which I'm not the biggest fan of that either. But at least the costumes were there. You could still get them. And then the RE3 remake was just like, here's the Resident Evil 3 costume, the original version, which even that was changed, which is somewhat annoying. And then here's the Resident Evil 1 costume, which they completely changed, which was super weird. It was like you literally had no reason to do that, but they changed that. More costumes, more unlockable weapons. Like, that's a classic thing with Resident Evil. Like, give me like the unlimited weapons. I know there are weapons in there, and they made some interesting choices because they made like unique things. They have like, everyone calls it like the butter knife, but it's like a superheated blade. And it's like, okay, that's, you know, like that's an interesting, you know, change to a base weapon that we have. Like, the knife is the normal thing for Resident Evil, and then you give us like an overpowered super knife. And it's like, okay, I can respect that. I can appreciate that as like an unlockable weapon. But the original Resident Evil 3 literally has a mode where you unlock like 4 different weapons. You get the unlimited handgun, assault rifle, Gatling gun, and then rocket launcher. And then the 5th thing you can unlock is an infinite ammo case where you just have unlimited ammo for literally every weapon. And then there's a million other things that the Resident Evil 3 remake really should have had, like I said, just about everything that they took out of the main game. But even if it was just more stuff to make it more entertaining for replayability's sake, like unlocking extra costumes and even more weapons, instead of it just being like, oh, you can get these coins and it allows you to do extra damage or you take less damage. It's like, I don't want dumb stat boosting coins. I want costumes and weapons. And I was super pissed because they had Resident Evil Resistance had everything I wanted the main game to have, and they just never patched that stuff in. I'm like, you can play as Jill in the online component. There's like 8 trillion costumes over there. There's weapons from Resident Evil 2, because she literally uses the revolver, the single action army that you can get in the Resident Evil 2 remake. It's also in the original Resident Evil 2. But they had that, and I'm like, you have all these extra weapons. The framework is basically 1-to-1. Why isn't any of this stuff like patched into the main campaign as unlockables? Like, just all these weapons should just have been thrown right into Resident Evil 3, 100%. And they just didn't. And it's insane to me. So there's a million things there. But even if I'm not going with like, they should have changed this, and this gameplay-wise or story-wise, like I did where, you know, all of Mirror's Edge, even just unlockable-wise, 2 costumes is absolutely ridiculous. Also, and it's a fair comparison, even the original Resident Evil 3 has a literal boutique where you unlock 5 different costumes. At least 5, it might actually be more than that. But it's just crazy. It's like, how in the world do you remake a game and just not do this stuff? Like, it's so insane to me. But that's very unfortunate. That's just how it is. But I'll go on to games that I actually do like, and I'll actually stick with Resident Evil. Because with Resident Evil 4, the one thing that I really would have enjoyed is if they put in the PRL 412 laser cannon. It's the only weapon that's missing from the Resident Evil 4 remake. They put in like all the other weapons. That's the one weapon they took out. I don't know why they didn't do it. Like a lot of people, I know I'm not the only person, but I thought for sure, I was like, okay, we didn't get it in the main campaign, but it's definitely gonna happen, you know, when we get the Ada DLC. I thought for sure, I was like, okay, they're gonna add Ada in, you know, we get her campaign, they're totally gonna add in the laser cannon. And then they did, and I was genuinely surprised by that. So that would have made it better. And I also another, obviously all this is personal opinion, I actually would have liked it, and this is for giant Resident Evil nerds, surprise, surprise, but much like the Resident Evil 3 remake, where it was supposed to be like the original costumes from 3 and then also the original, like Jill's first original costume, but technically they weren't. They were like they were different in some ways. They did the same thing for Ada for some really weird reason, where it was like, hey, you can actually unlock her original costume from Resident Evil 4, from the original one. And then I actually used it, and it's a dress. And then I actually equipped that costume, and I was like, this is literally a different dress. Like, and it was super weird. I'm like, and it's not like, oh, it's kind of different. It's literally a different dress. Like, her original dress in 4 is just like a long pink dress, and there's got like some butterflies and stuff on it. And in the remake, it's literally split in the middle. It's like half red, half black. And I was like, this is not her original costume. Like, it's literally just a new dress. And in all honesty, it's just weird that they even called it that. Like, it's the original version, because it's kind of titled in that way. I forgot exactly what they call it, but it was like, I think they call it classic dress, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like, this is literally a completely different outfit from what she had. It's literally got a different color on it. And it was just so weird to me that they called it that, and they were like, yeah, the classic dress. And it's like, this is nothing even remotely close to being her classic dress. It is like 100% different in every way, shape, and form, except for the fact that it's a dress. So I thought that was super weird, and I was like, I would have preferred her original outfit. I like the new one, and I think I would have been less bothered by it if it wasn't for the fact that they specifically titled it like the classic outfit, because they do that for Luis as well. If you didn't play the game, it doesn't matter. It's just these are characters that were all in the original, and he also gets his original costume, and his actually looks like it. It's, you know, once again, it's a bit more modernized, but it's also like, okay, that's his classic outfit. And then for her, it's literally a different outfit that they call the classic, and I was like, that is very weird. That doesn't make any sense. So I don't know why they did that. I thought that was odd. I also would have loved it if they had the classic jacket. I like Leon's jacket in the original 4 versus the remake, because it's like, it looks a little baggy. I like the more form-fitting look that he had in the original game. So that's, you know, random little personal thing. I don't mind if that's not in there, but definitely the fact that they were like, here's the classic dress, and then it's a totally different dress. And the PRL 412 laser cannon. Man, I wanted that back so bad. But those are, you know, just little things, like I said, branching off into games that I already like. Another one, Dead Space. I will always be, you know, first off, I hate EA, but I will always be upset by the fact that they did not end up putting a photo mode in the Dead Space remake, because I love that game so much. It's like the perfect remake. I think it's on par with like the Resident Evil 1 remake, where it's like, you know, this completely, like, if you don't want someone to have to go back to like PS1 Resident Evil, they can easily just play the RE1 remake, and it's like, here you go. It's better than the original. It's like the quintessential version of the beginning of this franchise. You can just go with the RE1 remake. The Dead Space remake is exactly like that. Like, they add in elements from later games even to kind of give more context to what happens in the sequels, or they show you things from the sequels from different perspectives, and then if you start with the remake, you can experience it again in the second game and be like, oh, this was in the first game and they did this. And it was such a cool idea, and I was like, oh man, they added like a lot of the later versions of lore are thrown back into the first game, as well as, you know, some of the extra mechanics, and just upgrading the original game as a whole, and, you know, making the ship completely immersive, where you can literally go through the entire ship yourself. You don't have to go through the tram and, you know, like the loading screens and stuff. You can, because it's faster, but you can literally walk through the entire ship, and it's like, oh, that's cool. You literally couldn't do that in the original game. So in that game, it was like, man, the one thing that's missing is if that game had a photo mode. Like, I would have loved that so much. They put in the foam finger, which was awesome. I haven't played it enough to unlock it, sadly, because it's just, you know, modern timing for me. But love that game, and I was like, man, I wish there was a photo mode. I could have, you know, it's not like it would have saved the game, but I would at least be able to go back to it and be like, man, look how good this Dead Space remake is, and just throw it in EA's face that they killed one of my favorite franchises twice. Still, I'm never gonna stop bringing that up, because I can't believe it. That's absolutely insane. But love the Dead Space remake. Buy it. I know it's crazy, but still buy it. I mean, there's still Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 for what that's worth. Dead Space Extraction, excessively underrated, I do believe. Once again, with this remake business, I was like, man, are they gonna redo Extraction? I'd love to see that in first person. Extraction could have been remade in VR. I would have lost my mind. But sadly, that won't happen, because EA was like, oh, you didn't make $8 trillion, so we're gonna kill it again. But that's just unfortunate. It is what it is with that, I guess. It is what it is. But for other games that I do actually enjoy, when it comes to we'll go with like some more modern things, going with GTA. And this is something I brought up a long time. It was like one of the first episodes. I wish GTA 5, and you can obviously, at this point, we got PC, we got mods, but I wish Grand Theft Auto went back to having really great cheat codes. I would have enjoyed that game at least a little bit more. And this is coming from someone that got it when it first came out. I got GTA 5 on the PS3, so I have not played it since. Like, I have it for free on the Epic Game Store. When they first came out, that was like their big play. But I got it when it first came out, and so when I finally beat the game, and and once again, this was the PS3 version, so the online wasn't exactly like the most magnificent thing on earth. It was like, cool, I can do free roam, and I did that for a minute. But even playing single player, I was like, oh, let's check out the cheat codes. And I just don't like the cheat codes in GTA 5. I was like, wow, these are like really lackluster for this franchise. That's like, there are memes online where it's like, having all the cheat codes written down and stuff. And, I got like flashes in my head. I couldn't recall the code 100%, but there's definitely that up, down, left, right, L1, R1, L1, R1 stuff, square, circle, triangle. That's not a code, but it's somewhere in there. Like they all have the same bases. And I love those old cheat codes. And they got the basics, invincibility, make your your stars shoot up automatically and then drop your stars automatically. They got like some of the basics, but they used to have some really good ones. Especially, GTA 4 had some great ones. They, flying cars, which you can literally get a flying car at this point. So if you just work for it, you literally don't need a mod to have a flying car, which is almost hilarious at this point. But and maybe we'll see it come back. I would love to see them like put the real work in for GTA 6 and just be like, hey, cheat codes are like, if anything, GTA is like the game for cheat codes. Unless you're just straight up using a Game Shark from back in the day. When it came to just like, I'm playing this game and I'm putting in cheat codes, it was Grand Theft Auto. That is like the #1 cheat code franchise for me on planet Earth. Like everything else is like, oh, this has a cool cheat, or unlock all characters, or a staple in like the early 2000s was big head mode. But other than that, it was like if there was like a singular game or just straight up franchise where it's like, hey, cheat codes all day, all night, it was Grand Theft Auto. And that started, I'm sure there were cheat codes for GTA 2 or 1 and 2 and stuff, but obviously GTA 3 was where I really picked up the franchise, like a lot of people, and the cheat code started right there, and all of it was in there. Flying cars, low gravity and stuff. I think low gravity was San Andreas, but the flying cars and everything. GTA 4 literally added cheat codes in like the final DLC. They added more cheat codes, and it's just like, where'd this like the extra just little bit of fun go? Like it's it's GTA. Like cheat codes are almost like a staple of the franchise. And I felt it was so lackluster. And obviously it doesn't take away from GTA 5 and enjoying the game and stuff. But there's definitely an element to it where, and my perfect example when it comes to cheat codes in a video game, Saints Row 2, I probably put the most time in ever. Solely based on, I love the cheat codes so much. I literally have like super old YouTube videos of me just playing it because I love the cheat codes. And it's just fun. It's like just the stuff you can do in that, like the angry pedestrian stuff, which GTA has, stuff like that is just super fun. Like just causing chaos in the entire town. I don't think they even put that code in GTA 5, which is like, I consider that to be one of the staples too. Like where it's specifically called like pedestrian riot or something like that. That's what it was in like Game Informer or like Game Facts and stuff. But I miss the classic, just cheat codes in GTA, like really good cheat codes. Like I said, they have some of the staples, but I'm like, yeah, they kind of left behind some of the fun stuff where it's like, hey, flying cars if you drive fast enough, and low gravity, which can be very dangerous if you don't have invincibility on. I kind of killed myself with that one time. I punched a car and it just started floating in the air, and I stayed on it for a little bit too long. And I hopped off and I was like, he'll make it. And he didn't make it. I was like, I wasn't even that high off the ground, but it killed him. And I was like, okay. But I missed like the super silly cheat codes when it comes to GTA. So that's something that I miss. And like I said, we'll see what happens in GTA 6. And, obviously if I want to, there will be mods anyway. So I don't really have to be concerned when it comes to the realm of cheat codes and stuff like that. But that's just something I miss, because I always felt like that was definitely a part of that franchise. That's just something that I miss personally. So that's my thoughts on cheat codes when it comes to GTA 6, but still, or GTA 5, and hopefully them coming back in GTA 6. Which, man, if they had the pedestrian riot, the technology for how many characters could possibly even be shown at one time would be insane to actually see them fighting, especially if it was you make them riot and you gave them weapons and you combine those two. That would be nuts, doing that on like current gen tech, where it's just so many characters can pop up and just bullets flying. Like, it would be insane to see that actually happening on like the PS5 and stuff. But I'd love to see it. We'll see what happens, but I would love to see it. Something else super random that I think, and it's weird that this kind of goes back to Resident Evil a little bit, but something else that I feel like would make those games better. Well, I guess I shouldn't. It wouldn't really make the games better because it's technically separate games. Because I'm thinking more of like the online stuff. So I guess I technically can't count them as, like RE4 and I think technically RE8 was where like RE Verse came from, which died out so effing fast. It's absolutely insane. They killed that, and Resident Evil Resistance is still up, by the way. For anyone that didn't know that, Resident Evil Resistance, you can technically still play it. They killed off RE Verse, and Resistance is still up. That says a lot, but unfortunate that, it's hard to do those asymmetric things, but that was fun at least. RE Verse was RE Verse, and that's why they killed it. But I guess it's more for the online component. The online elements for the Resident Evil games, not even I mean, honestly, it would have to be totally, it almost goes back to the beginning of this episode with the Mirror's Edge thing. They'd have to be totally different. I did like an entire episode on this, but the online stuff, if they do it again for whatever the next Resident Evil is going to be, it should just be Mercenaries online. They should just make Mercenaries mode and like a consistently updated thing. As long as they're within the engine, everything that's been in Mercenaries from Resident Evil 7 up to now, every game that's in the same engine should be put into Mercenaries mode. There should be all the levels, all the characters, all the weapons, all of that stuff should be the online component. So I guess that's not really what would make a game better. That would just make for a better game in general, or online component, or online game as a whole. Because they do count as separate downloads. They're not just in the menu. They are technically separate games. So technically that would just be a good game idea. But like I said, if you're interested in that, you can watch the whole video where I talk about what they can do to just make an online component, because I don't understand why they keep doing that, but they won't do, everyone says Outbreak, and I'm like, Mercenaries is even easier. Outbreak should be its own game. Just make Mercenaries. It's just levels and shooting. Just throw the levels in and then let us shoot. And then throw in every character from every game. You get like 20 characters or something and a bunch of cool levels. Like, I don't understand how that wasn't their idea from day one. Like, just make Mercenaries. Go with every game. And then you just update it per game. It's so simple. It's like the simplest thing in the world. I don't know how they haven't thought of that, but maybe that'll change. Maybe they're working on it. Maybe that's what we'll get with either 9 or whatever this remake is, which I do personally hope is Code Veronica. But we'll see what happens with that. We'll see what happens. Like I said, that is technically its own game as a whole, and not really changing anything else within the game itself. But there are so many other things that I think, obviously different franchises and games in general, where it's like all of this extra stuff would have made the game better. And hopping over, staying within the Resident Evil, well, it's not the Resident Evil engine. For anyone that didn't know, the RE engine stands for like Reach for the Moon engine. I don't know why they did that. Nobody does. But jumping from a different RE engine franchise to another one, Devil May Cry 5. They should have made a straight up multiplayer mode. Like, I don't know why they didn't do that. They have the weird system that they created where it's like, someone is in a totally different part of the level. You barely even see them. There's like one level, I think, maybe 2, where you actually fight next to the person. And it's like, this is actually kind of awesome. We're actively fighting enemies together at the exact same time. I don't understand why they wouldn't have just made that more of a component, or allowed for multiplayer during the Bloody Palace mode. There are mods for it on PC, for anyone that didn't know that, but I don't understand why that wasn't something that they were like, hey, what if we just let people play multiplayer and just play together during the Bloody Palace mode? Just make it more difficult, or heck, keep the difficulty and just let it be fun. By the time you get up to the higher levels anyway, it's challenging enough where even if you have multiple people, you can still die off. So just do it like that. Like, I don't understand why that wasn't something that they thought to do, considering they added this weird multiplayer element where it's like, hey, you're playing with this person. It's like, they're like 100 miles away from it. Like, I'm looking at them between like 18 cracks in a wall, and they're just over there. Like, we never actually interact. It's technically a person playing at the same time, but it's not that, it's not nearly as special as they tried to make it seem, except for like the very few moments where you're like either right next to each other, or if you're on like the other side of the wall or something, and you can like see through a grate or whatever, and it's like, okay, I can see them right on the other side, right next to me, taking on their enemies, and not like, they're a mile over that way in the distance or something. But that would have made the game, and the game's amazing. I love Devil May Cry 5. I think it's the best one. Like, it finally usurped 3 as my favorite one. But for sure, that would have made it better, because it, much like with just elements where it's like, this is kind of in there, like with Resident Evil 3, where it's like, you have costumes, but you change them, and then you have all this other stuff that you can just throw right in. It's like, well, you came up with this idea to do like this pseudo multiplayer thing. Why not just make that, like more explosive for people to play and be like, hey, you're actually playing and fighting together? Or at the very least, like I said, just specifically, if the whole story campaign played out exactly the same, just throw in classic multiplayer for Bloody Palace mode. Like, it would have been insane. People would have loved that. I probably would have played the game way longer than I did, had there actually just been a multiplayer component to that. But it's just one of those things where it's like, they put stuff in the game and it's like right there, but they don't go all the way with it. And that was the whole point of this video. It's like just little things that can make games better, or obviously if it's just a bad game, something that could just make it good in general to you. But that's definitely one of those elements where I think about it, and I don't think about it too much, but it does pop up where it's like, why did they do it like that? That's such a weird way to do it. Or at least, even if it wasn't Bloody Palace mode, just let us fight together. You know, there should have been like at least one actual boss fight. Like the section where you actually fight next to someone is like a decent enemy rush area, I guess. But it's like, there should have been a straight up boss fight that was like, hey, here's like 2 characters as they interact. Or it should have been like each character has a moment, and then maybe you do like one solid boss fight where all 3 of them actually have to fight together because the enemy is that tough. That would have been great. And they kind of had that in the story a little bit, but the characters don't end up actually doing that. That was kind of just a story mode where it's like they all could have fought the person at once, but it wouldn't have necessarily worked. But I'm like, that should have been in there. That should have been in there. But I think that's enough. I'm sure there are a million other ones, as you know, it goes with these episodes. You know, I'm kind of just going off the cuff. So I'm sure there's a ton that I'll randomly think of, like, crap, I forgot about that game, or I didn't think about this thing, because typically I get on like one specific tangent. And with Resident Evil, there's quite a few I could go through as far as that franchise as a whole. As much as I love it, favorite franchise, each game has like, there's always something that you can be like, why didn't they do this very seemingly obvious thing? It was right there. So, you know, those are my thoughts. Like I said, I'm sure there are other ones. Heck, I might make a sequel. If I actually think of enough games, I might actually make a second episode that's the same topic. I never do that. But for this sort of topic, I think it could be worth it because there's so many games out there. But for now, I'd love to know your thoughts on what random features or elements could have either saved a game in your eyes. If it was just like, hey, if they just changed this, whether it's a remake or just the old version of the game, what's something random that they could have just done to just make the game a little bit better for you? There are quite a few games, because this is an unfortunate thing we have nowadays, where it's like New Game Plus would be really cool. It still really sucks to me that Control never ended up getting a New Game Plus. You have to use like mods on PC to basically get that. And the same with Jedi Fallen Order. Like the second game has New Game Plus, but the first one doesn't, and I always hated that. I was like, man, these games are so effing amazing. I'd love to play through them a second time, but I want to have all my abilities and stuff. And you know, heck, let me up the difficulty. It's not really a challenge thing. It's just the way that they do the powers. But it's like, hey, just and it takes work. God of War is the perfect example. God of War 2018, they had to put the work in to make it so you could do New Game Plus. And it was like, hey, we have to add in these features to say like, hey, you can't do this level yet, or you can't go to this area, despite the fact that you have the weapon. You have to wait until the story beat hits. And when they officially did it, I was like, oh, so everyone can put the work in if they want to, but most people don't. If they don't add New Game Plus, they just don't add it at all. And I'm like, that sucks. So I wish Control had it. Hopefully Control 2 does end up having it somehow. But, I wish Control had it, and I wish Jedi Fallen Order had it, because I love those games. And it's like, man, I would love to just start from the beginning and just use all of my powers from the beginning of the game. And then just, like, hey, you can't go here because you're blocked off. Plain and simple. But sadly, that's a thing. And, if games just launch with New Game Plus, we won't get into that topic because that's more of a developer and how games are made these days. Different topic. But that would have helped both those games for me personally. It would have made me love them just a little bit more. If I actually could have played through them with my powers and done the straight up New Game Plus instead of just start all the way over. It's like, oh, well, it's not as entertaining when you're just starting all the way over and then have no power. So that's where I'll end it. I would love to know your thoughts. What little elements can make a game better? What could just save a game for you in general? So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.